Chapter 1931. Knowles returned to Taylorton. A pungent smell hit him once he entered the villa. He frowned and headed straight toward the kitchen after removing his shoes. The kitchen was filled with thick smoke, and the smell was pungent, but the kitchen hood wasn't turned on. Daisy stood there and coughed while she was frantically walking around and trying to solve the problem. Knowles' face dropped, and he immediately pulled her out of the kitchen. He then immediately switched on the hood and turned off the fire. Daisy stood there, stunned, her face covered in grease. He stood in the kitchen and cleared up the countertop. Daisy grew more anxious because he was quiet. She lowered her head and bit her lip. "I'm sorry, I was trying to make dinner." Knowles took a deep breath, turned around, and calmly looked at her. "You don't need to make dinner." Daisy looked up but didn't speak. He stopped in front of her, raised his hand, and wiped the grease off her face. "You won't listen. You would have blown the kitchen up if I came home a little later." She turned away and pouted. "I was just trying to make dinner, but you are more concerned about the kitchen blowing up." She removed the apron and tossed it away. "You just don't understand." Knowles was surprised, looking at her puffed-up cheeks, and burst out laughing. "I'm not worried about the kitchen blowing up. I'm worried that you'll be hurt." Daisy pressed her lips together and lowered her gaze. "We were supposed to have dinner until I messed it up. We should order takeout." Knowles touched her face. "We don't need to get takeout when I'm here." In just 20 minutes, he was able to get the kitchen back to how it was and even made a warm meal. Daisy looked at the meal on the table and admitted that he had learned their cuisine quickly. Knowles got some soup for her. "If you really want to do something for me, you don't need to cook. Just stay by my side." She looked at him. "That's all?" He nodded and looked into her eyes. "That would make me happy." Daisy was surprised and had to look away. Her plan was to prepare his favorite food, and then follow what Freya taught her. Now the dinner was a bust, so she only had the final part of the plan, and she didn't know if it was going to work. Seeing how she zoned out, Knowles looked at her and asked, "What's on your mind?" She looked around and ate her soup. "Nothing." Daisy took longer than usual to finish her meal. Knowles had finished but didn't rush her. "I'm going to the study. Let me do the dishes when you're ready." He got up and went upstairs. Daisy finished her food quickly, rushed to the bedroom, and took out the nightgown she had gotten from the mall. Looking at the thin lace dress, she hesitated. "That's all the cloth." She stood in front of the mirror, held the gown in front of her, and then started blushing. The dress was too steamy. She picked up her phone and texted Freya. "Daisy, is this going to work? The dress is too sexy." "Freya, it's supposed to be sexy." "Daisy, what if he gets angry?" "Freya, the sooner he finds out, the better." Daisy tossed her phone aside, took a deep breath, and went into the bathroom with it. In the study, the warm light shone on the velvet carpet. Chapter 1932. Knowles sat in front of the computer, analyzing some data while knocking his knuckles on the desk. Edison sent him a text. "Sir, we have intel that Donald is still alive." He picked up the phone, read the text, and frowned. Even though he expected Donald to be alive, when it was confirmed, it made things tense. Donald was the worst enemy he had ever dealt with. Ken Pruitt wasn't half as vicious as he was. It had taken him so much effort to drag him down, but he managed to break out of prison after half a year of incarceration. The police had been hunting for him for a month with tracker dogs and finally found his prison clothes next to a cliff. They had blood on them and were badly frayed, but there was nobody. Donald's death wasn't confirmed at that time, but if he was going to break out of prison, he wouldn't die. Knowles replied, "Keep an eye on that." He placed his phone down and rubbed his temples. The light shone on his face and cast a shadow, making him look tired. He looked at the clock and realized that it was already 10 p.m. The bedroom door was half open. That dark corner swallowed the light around the house. He slowly walked toward the dark and stopped in front of the door before pushing it open. He was stunned when he saw the person still awake under the comforters. Her dark hair was behind her back and her lowered head was blushing. Her eyes were clear like water, making her look so innocent. He pressed his lips together and looked guilty. Daisy had wrapped herself up with her comforter, holding it tighter as Nolace was staring at her. Nolace took a deep breath and looked sorry. "Why are you still awake?" She grabbed the comforter and avoided his eyes. "I can't sleep." He sat at the edge of the bed and leaned in. "Were you waiting for me?" Daisy lowered her head but didn't speak. He noticed that she wasn't acting naturally, so he cupped her cheek. "What's going on?" "Nothing. Let's go to sleep." Daisy lay down with her back facing him. She didn't dare let the comforter go, and her face was burning. She backed away at the last moment. Nolace noticed how odd she was, so his eyes went to the covers. He had noticed that she had been covering herself up all this time as if she was hiding something. He smiled, leaned closer to her with both his hands on her sides, and said with a gentle and loving tone, "Daisy." Daisy was stunned, and in that short moment, he pulled the comforter away. Her heart almost exploded because she wasn't ready for that. This was even more embarrassing than being naked in front of him. Her ears and neck were red, and she couldn't look him in the eyes. Nolace froze. What he saw wasn't just any surprise, it was a huge one. He had never seen Daisy like that. She had black stockings with a nightgown on, and it was very alluring. He was staring at this innocent, lovable face, yet she was so sexy. It took his breath away. He almost lost control, because his blood was rushing everywhere, but he flipped the comforter back onto her and sat facing her with his back. Daisy was surprised. "Nolly?" Nolace sat at the edge of the bed with his legs crossed and his hand on his forehead. "Daisy, why are you wearing that?" she asked. "Are you angry?" He didn't reply. It had nothing to do with anger. Chapter 1933. Daisy looked disappointed, but when she remembered what Freya said, she pressed her lips together and braced herself. "Nolly, can I ask you a question?" He nodded. He didn't know how to face her under these circumstances. Daisy looked at him and sounded very serious as she asked, "Do you have a dysfunction?" The air suddenly froze, and the silence was nerve-wracking. Nolace turned to look at her. "What?" Daisy looked away while she blushed. "I'm testing you like this, yet you haven't done anything, so do you have a dysfunction?" Before she could finish, Nolace had already climbed on top of her and pressed his finger on her lip. He pretended to be angry. "So, you think that I have a performance issue?" Daisy looked away. Nolace raised her chin. "Daisy, you shouldn't question a man without proof when it comes to this. You might regret it." "Why?" Her eyes were so clean they were spotless. Even though she tested him this way, she was still as clean as a sheet of paper. It made him want to do something to her, but he knew that he shouldn't. Nolace finally gave up. However, if he let her off like this, she probably would really think that he had problems. He planted a kiss on her cheek and held her hand while the other hand grabbed her waist. "If you insist on knowing, I'll show you." Daisy was in shock. The temperature in the room rose, and the shadow of the two of them overlapped on the wall. Daisy didn't look into his eyes while her ears burned. The eyes that were on her body were fiery. Nolace buried his face in her neck and breathed as if he could melt her any minute. "Daisy, do you have your answer now?" He nibbled at her. Her eyes shone while she pressed her lips together and nodded. Nolace got up, handed her a napkin to clean her palm, and walked into the bathroom. Daisy pulled the blanket over half her face and listened to the sound of water while her face started burning up. Questioning him was a mistake. The next day, Daisy attended the promotional event for a luxury skincare brand. After it ended, she sat backstage with a cup of coffee in hand and zoned out. Freya called her name a few times, but Daisy didn't react until she stood in front of her. "Daisy Vanderbilt." She snapped back and looked up. What? Freya crossed her arms. I should be asking you that. Why are you zoning out? Daisy looked down and blushed. Why did what happened last night come to mind? Freya could sense something, so she sat down next to her. I guess my plan worked? Daisy turned to look at her. Kind of. Freya looked at her, curiously. What do you mean kind of? Daisy felt awkward about it, so she put down her cup of coffee. He doesn't have a problem, Freya smirked. Isn't that great then? At least that proves he's normal. Mr. Goldman, are you here to see Miss Vanderbilt? The voice of a crew member caught their attention. Colton appeared at the door and surprised Daisy. Colton? He nodded before looking into Freya's eyes. Can you come outside? Freya frowned. Did he come all the way there to see me? Daisy whispered, what's wrong with him? He doesn't look very happy. Who knows? Freya got up and walked outside. Chapter 1934. After Colton left the other morning angrily, he never showed up. She didn't know why he came to see her. They walked to the corridor, and Freya stopped. Can I help you? Colton took a deep breath, turned to look at her, and finally spoke after a long pause. Stop taking birth control after this. Freya was surprised. Did he find out? What did he mean by that? Was he trying to get her pregnant? Colton was silent for a while, then added, I'll take precautions. Freya froze and looked around nervously. Colton, are you all right? You came all the way here to talk about this? He wasn't shy about it. Are you afraid that someone will hear us? She smirked. Do you think I'm as shameless as you are? Colton suddenly walked closer to her and pressed his palms on the wall behind her. Freya, I'm asking you a very serious question. Freya looked at him and was curious. He slowly parted his lips. Do you not want children because we're not officially together? He could understand if that were the case, because they were in a complicated situation. They could just get into a relationship. Freya took a deep breath. Colton, do you think that that's the reason? He frowned and didn't speak. She poked his shoulder. Would you make it official if I got pregnant accidentally? Do you think I would try to get to a better position if I were pregnant? Colton frowned. Is that how you think of me? When you're bored, that might be how you think. Freya was going to push him away when he grabbed her by her shoulders. Freya, you started playing with my feelings. You didn't turn me away 3 years ago, but blocked me without saying anything. Who am I to you? His eyes were filled with anger, and he was ready to bring back what had happened in the past. Freya pressed her lips together and stared at him. You left without a word. Wasn't that implying that it was just a one-night stand? He stuttered. That was. She continued. Did you expect me to still contact you and reach out to ask about our relationship? You know that I wouldn't do that, and even if I did, what would the answer be? I didn't want to hear all the sarcastic remarks and terrible things coming from you. I know my place and don't care about labels because once you're married, our relationship will end. Freya struggled out of his grasp and left. Colton froze on the spot because that was the first time he felt so helpless. His phone rang, and it was Leonardo who told him that Nolace was waiting for him in his office. He hung up and left. A crew member who was hiding in the alley to smoke was so shocked he overheard a secret conversation that he forgot to smoke. Freya, isn't that Daisy's assistant? Coleman Goldman has a secret relationship with the assistant. That is big news. At Black Gold. Nole sat on the couch and slowly sipped his tea. Colton showed up not long after that. He walked to Noles and sat across from him. Yes? Noles continued drinking tea while he raised his brows. Chapter 1935. Ha, you came to me before I even went to see you. Colton looked around and crossed his legs. Yanis was a tech company that you used Donald's share to set up, right? You hit it very well. Noles ran his fingers over the rim of the cup. It's just a small company, so there is nothing to shout about. Colton crossed his arms. Would it still be considered small if it had a shareholder from such a big group? He then stared at Knowles. What's your intention behind using someone else's name to partner up with Black Gold? I have no special intentions. Knowles raised his brows and chuckled. People say that you need to be very careful when working with the Goldmans. I'm just doing my due diligence. Colton squinted, trying to guess if he was telling the truth. Knowles placed the cup down. I didn't come here about that today. Colton looked at him. Get to the point. Donald is still alive and is very possibly trying to find out where I am. I can't expose myself in Bassburg, but to be safe, you should send people to quietly protect your sister. The Goldmans had a huge influence in Bassburg, and even if Donald was able to track Knowles here, it wouldn't be smart for him to challenge them. Since Donald was hiding in the shadows, they had to be extra careful. He could ignore his safety but couldn't put Daisy in danger because of his negligence. Colton frowned. Isn't Donald dead? That was the rumor, but his body was never found, so there's a huge chance that he's still alive. Knowles' gaze was sharp. I've been trying to locate him for the past 2 years, but I've just recently found some information. He slowly got up. I've warned you. Colton raised his brow as he watched him leave. That was why Knowles never exposed his actual identity, even after being in Bassburg for so long. He was trying to cover his tracks. Knowles' power was mostly in Yarramore. He came over for Daisy, so he had probably not brought a lot of people with him. He informed Colton about the information just to be careful. He would be able to carry out his mission if the Goldmans were protecting Daisy. He had to take precautions and find a foolproof plan for Daisy's sake, but what about himself? Colton stared at the cup of tea with a stoic expression. He would never think of protecting anyone other than his family, but now, if anything happened to Freya, he would probably think the same way as Knowles did. The next day, the rumor about Colton and Daisy's assistant surfaced, but it was covered up after a few minutes. Since it was quickly covered up, nobody noticed it. Giselle sat on the couch and enjoyed her coffee while her phone showed that she was on a call on loudspeaker. Miss Peterson, I've removed all the news about Mr. Goldman. Nothing would be able to spread. Thank you. She hung up. The findings of a private investigator she had hired and the rumors were the same. Colton had spent some time in a hotel with a woman. The private investigator had gotten hold of the hotel's security footage, and she had seen the woman in the video before Coleman had been in a relationship with that woman for a while now. That's why Coleman found an excuse when the woman left the dining table that day and left too. Giselle pressed her lips together, and after a moment, she picked up her phone and called Colton. Mr. Goldman, I need to speak to you. At a high-end restaurant, Chapter 1936. Soon, Colton and Leonardo appeared after Giselle had waited for a while. He pulled the chair and sat down. Is there anything I can help you with, Miss Peterson? Giselle handed the tablet to him. On the screen, there was a screenshot of the news that happened not long ago. He took over the tablet, and his gaze turned cold. Before he could say anything, Giselle looked at him and said, Luckily, I noticed it sooner and got someone to put down the news. I know this will negatively affect you if it gets spread out. Colton narrowed his eyes. It seems to me that you're very into this kind of news, Miss Peterson. Giselle was stunned. She lowered her head and asked, You think I'm the one who did it? Nope, Colton replied as he placed the tablet on the table. Anyway, thank you for helping me to remove the news, Miss Peterson. If his relationship with Freya got out, she might avoid him even more to prevent herself from getting into bigger trouble. Giselle grinned at him on the surface, but she was disappointed inwardly. She could sense Colton was lying when he said he did not suspect her. If she really wanted to do it, she would have spread the news even further when she noticed it. However, she would never do that. Besides, she had her own agenda for withdrawing the news too. She's the girl you like, right? Colton froze for a moment. His pupils shifted, but he did not say anything. Even though he did not say anything, He had already answered the question. Giselle smiled. If that is the case, then I guess it's unnecessary for me to remove the news. He put the cup down and said, I owe you one, Miss Peterson, so I'm buying you a meal this time. Okay, replied Giselle. While they were eating, they talked about their work most of the time. Giselle was smart. She wouldn't ask anything that he did not want to talk about. She could see that Colton did not like to talk very much, especially when it came to things about him. After they finished their lunch, they left the restaurant and ran into James and another woman in front of the elevator. Even though James was wearing a hat, his flashy clothing had sold him out. The woman standing next to him was none other than Freya, and both of them were waiting for the elevator. When Giselle saw them, she turned her head to look at Colton. Colton squinted and fixed his gaze on Freya. The door of the elevator opened up, and both of them walked into it. Colton took a few quick steps toward the elevator, and Freya was stunned at his sudden appearance when the door was about to close. Colton stepped into the elevator first, and Giselle followed him. Giselle looked at Freya and nodded at her with a smile on her face. Freya lowered her head and clenched her fists tightly. James was surprised to see them as he said, Miss Peterson, Mr. Goldman? What a coincidence. Giselle maintained a smile on her face as she replied, yeah, it's really such a coincidence. The elevator stopped at a certain floor, and a few more people came in. The spacious area was instantly filled with people. Suddenly, Freya felt someone scratching her palm. She knew who it was without looking. She wanted to pull her hand away, but the other person did not allow her to. None of the people in the elevator noticed that they had been holding hands. When the elevator arrived on the first floor, Freya shrugged him off and went out of the elevator with James. Colton squinted and followed after them. James walked toward his car in the parking lot and opened the door. I'm sure you're going to Tenet, right? How about I give you a lift? Freya nodded. She had come here to buy lunch for Daisy and had accidentally run into James. Chapter 1937. Just when Freya was about to get into the car, a hand grabbed her arm. She turned her head around and met gazes with Colton. His gaze was deep. Even though he was looking at Freya, he was talking to James. Mr. Tell, I have something to discuss with Miss Pruitt. Why don't you help me to send Miss Peterson back? James was stunned. What? Does he think I'm a cab? Before Freya could say anything, Colton had dragged her away. Giselle watched as both of them walked toward another car. She pressed her lips tightly, and her face sank. However, she soon returned to normal and smiled at James. I hope you don't mind it, Mr. Tell. James narrowed his eyes and studied her. After a short while, he shrugged and said, whatever. Get into the car. On the other side, Freya was looking outside through the window. Colton glanced at her and asked, it seems to me that you're very close to that guy, huh? Freya was momentarily stunned. She turned her head around and asked him with the same tone of voice, it seems to me you're very close to that Miss Peterson as well, aren't you? Colton stopped the car on the side of the road and turned around to look at her. I'm the one who's asking you a question. Why can't you just answer it first? Then why can't you answer my question, she replied. He took a deep breath and looked at her intently. Freya, why must you make everything difficult? Freya looked back at him and said, you're the one who's making things difficult here. I just ran into James when I was buying lunch for Daisy. But you were having lunch with Giselle. Did I ask you anything about that? Colton was dumbfounded. He looked at her for a long while and chuckled. So that's what you're thinking. It seemed to him that she was jealous. Freya turned her head around and said, nope. I don't really care who you're having lunch with. Colton turned her face to look at her and went closer to her. Freya placed her finger on his lips subconsciously. His lips were so hot that her finger trembled. Colton moved her finger away and landed a kiss on her. Ugh. Freya looked at the pedestrians on the street. She did not want anyone to know that they were kissing, so she tried to push him away, but to no avail. After a while, he left her lips, caressed them with his finger, and said, "You're being jealous, I'm being jealous, so we're even now." Freya was stunned. At Tenet, Freya put the lunch on the table, and Daisy nearly cried, "Freya, you're the best. All of them are my favorite." She threw the script away and picked up the fork. Freya sat at the side and picked up the script. It was a script for a suspense drama in the Victorian era. "I thought Mr. Johnson wanted you to rest? Why are you reading this script so soon?" While eating, Daisy replied, "I picked this script myself. You can have a look at it. I think the storyline is pretty good." Freya flipped through the script. She did not know why but felt somewhat familiar and asked, "Is this suspense drama adapted from a novel?" "I guess so," replied Daisy. After Freya roughly read the plot line, including the character settings, she froze. This must be a joke, right? She rose to her feet and went to her laptop. Opening her laptop, she flipped through a box of stored drafts to a 500,000-word suspense series she had written 6 years ago. Other than the characters' names, the background setting was also different. Her story was based on the 19th century, while this one was based on the later Victorian era. Besides that, the plot and character settings had not changed at all, and even the direction of development and lines were exactly the same. Chapter 1938. Daisy rose to her feet and walked up to her. "What's wrong?" Freya took a deep breath and said, "I don't know who wrote this script, but they're plagiarizing." Daisy took over the laptop Freya gave her and walked to the couch. After cross-checking with the script, she said, "Oh my gosh, you're right. Only the story background and names of the characters have been changed. The rest are the same." She put the laptop down and continued. "Freya, do you have copyright?" "Yeah. I just published mine on the internet, but I didn't sell the copyright. Even if someone wants to buy the copyright, they will reach out to me." However, the thing was that no one contacted her, and she had no idea about the plagiarism at all. Soon, Daisy found the novel that this script was adapted from. It was published 4 years ago, and the series had already ended. Both of them did not expect that it was rather popular on the platform even though it was a plagiarized work. The next day, Daisy found the producer with the novel and Freya's manuscript. After reading the 2 books, the producer fell silent. After all, if it was really a plagiarized work, things would become difficult if they proceeded with the production. The staff member from the production team said, "Miss Vanderbilt, please give us some time. We'll contact the copyright holder and see what they have to say." Daisy and Freya then sat on the couch. The production team crew soon contacted the original novel's copyright holder. The copyright holder sent someone over to look into the matter. However, they said that there was no plagiarism as they had already bought the copyright to make changes. Freya rose to her feet and said, "That's impossible. If you guys have bought the copyright before, why don't I know anything about it?" The people from the copyright holder looked at each other in shock. Perhaps they did not want to aggravate the matter further, so they contacted the editor-in-chief of the original author's studio, who personally rushed to the producer's company, bringing with him the documents and the contract. It was precisely the copyright consent transfer letter. It turned out that the copyright transfer was the overseas platform. They had sold the copyright of her novel for $15,000. When Freya saw the signature on the contract was her pen name, she froze. How could this be? The editor-in-chief said, "Our author made changes to the original text only after getting the copyright, so this doesn't count as plagiarism. If you don't know anything about the transfer of copyright, I suggest you look for that overseas platform and ask for an explanation from them." Freya clenched her fists tightly. This was the first time other people deceived her. She rose to her feet and ran out of the office without any hesitation. Daisy followed after her. "Freya." When she was back in the car, Freya buried her face deeply in her palm. She was sad. Daisy went into the car and put her hand on her shoulder. She did not know how to comfort her either. "Daisy, I'm so stupid. I trusted them, but, she choked on her words, but I didn't expect that they would see my copyright behind my back. She had always thought that she had the copyright and had been waiting for an adaptation of her novel. However, after what happened today, it was only now that she realized she had relied on and trusted that overseas platform too much. After all, the contract stated clearly that she held the copyright of all her works. 6 years ago, it was the platform's representatives who told her that her series did not do very well. She thought it was because of her issue that caused the problem. However, the truth was that the platform had sold her copyright under her name behind her back, and she had been kept in the dark until today. It was only now she knew why the series would be terminated at that time, and it was also only now that she realized she was such an idiot. Daisy hugged her and comforted her. It's okay, Freya. Chapter 1939. Daisy looked at Freya with a serious face and said, this is their fault, but we can't let them take advantage of us. If worst comes to worst, we'll bring them down with us. We don't need to be afraid of them at all. Freya was stunned, and then a smile broke across her face. Thank you, Daisy, but I'm not going to do that to them. Daisy was taken aback. But they betrayed my trust, but without them, I wouldn't have the chance to publish any of my works, Freya said calmly. Now that we're even, I'm going to terminate my contract with them. Since they had betrayed her trust, there was no way she was going to work for them anymore. At night, at the Seaview Villa. After Freya finished taking her bath, she received a call from her editor. Freya, what the hell do you mean by this? Are you sure you want to terminate your contract with us? While she was drying her hair, she said indifferently, yes. I've made up my mind. Are you out of your mind? Do you know how much effort we've put into promoting your work? We've given you such a great opportunity, and now you want to terminate your contract? You sold my copyright behind my back. What else do you want me to do if I don't terminate my contract now? Continue to let you guys take advantage of me? The editor fell silent for a moment before saying, Freya, do you really think you're such a big and accomplished author after writing a few books? You should feel grateful that we like your books. Besides, do you know what it means when you terminate your contract without a reason before it expires? The copyright of your books will belong to us, and you won't get your pay. Freya hung up the call before the editor could finish his sentence. She took a deep breath and threw herself on the bed. All those books are my works. Do I really have to give up on them? Someone was standing by the door, and he only came in after a long while. Freya was startled by the shadow on the floor, and she only calmed down after seeing that the person standing against the light was Colton. When did you come here? He undid the button on his sleeves and replied, not long ago. Freya stood up, and Colton hugged her from the back, stunning her. She could smell the alcohol from him and asked, have you been drinking? A little bit, he replied. And you drove here? She asked, her voice filled with disbelief. However, Colton did not answer that question. Freya wanted to move his arms away, but he hugged her even tighter and started to kiss her neck. She frowned. I'm not in the mood today. We're not doing it today, he said. I just want to hug you. She turned her head around to look at him. Do you think I'll believe in you? Colton's face sank. Am I a monster? Freya nodded and said, you're asking me? I think you know the answer better than I do, right? As soon as she finished speaking, Colton picked her up and threw her on the bed. He tugged on his tie and trapped her in the corner of the bed. All right then. If you think I'm a monster then. He lay down and kissed her. In fact, he was not in the mood today, either. It was just that she triggered him. When he saw she was looking at him with her eyes wide open, he stopped and got up. Fine, I'll let you off tonight. Just when he was about to leave, a hand grabbed his sleeve. Colton was stunned and turned his head around to look at her. Freya released her hand and sat at the side of the bed. You shouldn't drive since you had alcohol. I don't want anything to happen to you on your way home. Colton narrowed his eyes, and it took him a long while before saying, are you worried about me? Freya lifted her head and looked at him. She did not know why, but the dark cloud in her heart dissipated as soon as he arrived. She turned her face sideways and said, "Yeah." Slightly stunned, Colton fixed his gaze on her silently. Chapter 1940. Both of them stared at each other in abysmal silence. After a long while, he straightened his body and cleared his throat. "Finally, you have finally said something sensible." Freya chuckled. "Well, you don't look that annoying as well when you keep quiet." Colton was rendered speechless. Under normal circumstances, he would have fought back, but seeing how happy she was, he did not know why, but felt rather good to keep quiet once in a while as well. He did not say anything for a long while. Freya couldn't help herself anymore and laughed. She tugged at his sleeves and said, "How long are you going to keep quiet like this?" He crossed his arms in front of his chest and turned his head sideways embarrassingly. I just don't feel like talking." "Really?" Freya laughed. She was aware that Colton was someone who did not want to expose his true emotions to other people. It was just that she did not expect such a cute side from him. When she said he did not look that annoying when he kept silent, she did not expect him to take it so seriously. Colton glanced at her and asked, "Are you feeling better now?" Her smile froze. "Did he overhear my conversation with the editor?" She lowered her head and replied, "Yeah. I feel a lot better now." "Then take some rest. I'm going to the guest room." Just when Colton turned around, Freya grabbed his clothes again. "What if I become sad again after you leave?" Colton turned his head around to look at her. This was the first time she tried to tease him. Something appeared in his head, and he chuckled. After that, he walked up to her. He leaned forward and secured her tightly in his arms. "I know what you want. You can always tell me if you don't want me to go." Freya grabbed the collar of his shirt and pulled him down. She turned around and mounted on top of him, stunning him. "What are you?" Freya placed her finger on his lips and said, "Let me do it this time." The weather was cold at 6 o'clock in the morning. Colton stopped his car in front of the Goldman mansion. He lay on top of the steering wheel, and his ears were red to the tips. It had been him who took the lead and occupied the upper hand, but last night, not only was he the passive one, but he let Freya do whatever she wanted to him. He was addicted to her enthusiasm and passion. He leaned against the back of the seat and covered his face with his palm. He looked ahead through the slit between his fingers and thought, "Am I considered running away like this?" By the time Freya woke up, it was already 9 a.m., and Colton was long gone. She placed the back of her hand on her forehead as her body screamed at her. She must have gone out of her mind last night. That was why she would allow herself to do something like that to Colton. She got out of the bed, and then she saw a piece of paper underneath the cup in the drawer beside the bed. She assumed that it was a note Colton had left for her. "Just wait, I'm going to get back to you another day." While looking at the note, Colton's satisfied expression appeared in her head, and she chuckled. She had never expected Colton to have such a cute side to him when he got bullied by her. At Tenet, Daisy had picked several scripts, but all of them were inferior to the suspense drama series she read the other day. She couldn't make up her mind, so Charlie crossed his arms and frowned. "Now that you've become popular, you don't like these productions anymore?" In fact, these scripts were not bad. They were all rather popular, and even the directors were well known in the film and television industry. Besides, other than the main characters, most of the supporting cast were experienced actors and actresses. Since they were the supporting cast, it meant that Daisy was going to take the lead. Daisy raised her head. "I played both protagonist and antagonist, but I want to try something that I've never tried before." "Geez, everyone keeps saying that I'm choosy, but they don't know that the choosy one is you," said Charlie. However, he was not angry. He kept all the scripts and said, "Suit yourself. You know what you want, and if you want to challenge yourself, you first need to improve your acting skills. But I don't think that is hard for you."